Hello, 7. Today is Thursday. This is Thursday's lesson. If you have not yet completed the assignments that were due on Wednesday, I hope you do those first. Please pause the video if you need to take care of those first. Otherwise, let's go ahead and continue. We're going to begin, and some of you have to be a little bit more on top of this. There's two parts to the lesson. So some people are unsure. I didn't know there were two parts. Well, you would know if you watched the video. So please make sure you're watching the video. Let's go to the textbook questions that were one portion of the assignment for Wednesday. What I need you all to do is please correct these in detail. So if you went ahead and wrote them on paper, correct them in pen. If you went ahead and typed them, correct them in a different color, preferably red on either end, but in pen is fine. That you can just make sure you can read it. Even if you got the answer correct, you can always add more details like when we were in the classroom. Number 1, why were Native American groups resistant to white settlement west of the Appalachians? So let's go to number 1. Why were these Native Americans resistant, to white settlement? Well, you have to, number 1, realize that the Native Americans saw these individuals as a potential threat, because they're coming on to their territory that they were familiar with for many, many years, Native American groups and the settlers broke out, very quickly. Isolated acts of violence led to larger acts of revenge. So, both sides killed innocent lives. And when that happened, greater violence would occur on both ends. So innocent lives were killed on both ends. Anytime there was a smaller act of violence, it would turn into a larger one. At the same time, you have to be aware that these white settlers, their way of life is different than the Native Americans. So they see them as a great threat. At the same time, when these white settlers have supplies that the natives don't have, or weapons that the natives don't have, the natives also see this as a great threat as well. Also, what you need to know is the natives, you may recall from previous units of Revolution as well, the natives they're going to be armed by the British. The British is going to provide them with muskets and gunpowder, so guns that they could use. So you all of a sudden have the Shawnees and the Miamis. They're going to drive off white settlers from the area because they now have the equipment necessary to do so. That's going to increase tension because now both sides are equipped. Number 2, why? Generate explanations why. When the Americans had already defeated a British ship near New York Harbor, were New England merchants fearful of British attacks on their seaports? So basically you want to know why New England merchants were fearful of British attacks on their seaport. As you have noticed so far, this war has many, many battles at sea, many difficulties at sea. What you need to realize is the seaports were ports of trade. They're ports of trade. They're supplies that individuals depended on. So the Americans had already defeated a British ship near New York Harbor, but New England merchants are still fearful of a British attack on the seaports. Well, the British, all of a sudden, you have to know that the British know that the seaports are essential, and especially essential to trade. The natives as well are dependent on trade. But what you have to realize is when the Americans when the Americans go ahead, and let me just get to the area I need to here. When the Americans already defeated the British ship, they have to also think of retaliation, They have to think of retaliation. How is British going to respond here? Is British going to go ahead and retaliate? Is the United States prepared for this? Is it prepared to go ahead with continuous battle? Is it prepared to go to war? The retaliation effect is essential for you to realize right here. Number three, neither side, wants to look weak. Number three, compare the ability of the U.S. Army in 1812 with that of the Patriots at the beginning of the American Revolution. Okay. You have to know, and please make sure you have this, Madison did not want to go to war. Okay? Madison didn't want to go to war. A lot of Americans weren't as cautious. A lot of Americans were pushing for war. In New England, though, anti-war feelings were strong. But members of Congress from the South and West wanted to push for war. So South and West is pushing for more than this area of the nation, the area that we live in, New England. You have, war hawks, individuals who are determined, you should have this term down, determined to go into war. The Americans, basically, the United States is not ready for war. Why is the United States not ready for war at the beginning of 1812? If you recall, Thomas Jefferson, he reduced spending on defense. That was a big goal of Thomas Jefferson. He reduces spending on defense. Please make sure you have that down. The Navy has only 16 ships, okay? The Navy has only 16 ships, and it's going to meet a British fleet that is much larger and much more prepared than they are, okay? In 1812, British had 97 naval vessels in the American waters. You may want to jot that down. I pulled up the slide so you can see. America had only 22. The U.S. Navy is depleted under Jefferson because he reduced that spending. Therefore, the Army is small and ill-equipped. And, many officers are not unsure of what to do. They're clear that, we're not prepared here. There's few regular troops as well. This is similar, please make sure you have it, to the American Revolution. If you remember, at the beginning of the Revolution, it looked as if the colonists were going to lose the war, that there was no chance that the colonists would outdo the British. That's because the colonists, if you remember, the uniforms were not all the same. Were wearing different uniforms. Some colonists killing individuals on their own side, killing other colonists, unsure of who was who. You have individuals who are going into battle without proper shoes, without proper equipment. You have them fighting extremely close, and a lot of, in that sense, you have a lot of individuals dying that probably, definitely didn't, nobody needs to die, but you have individuals who are dying because of error, because of firing at the wrong individuals, or because you're fighting so close, you're killing so many people and innocent lives as well. So both at the beginning of 1812 and the beginning of the Revolution, the United States is not prepared to tackle the British. It's because the British seem more prepared. In this case, the British seem more prepared with all the equipment that they have. The total ships is essential. So Madison is going to call on privateers. You're going to want to jot that down. Those are privately owned ships. That's the cheapest and best Navy, and the only way you can get this going right away. The only way he could build up the Navy was to rely on these privateers. Otherwise, the United States will not seem to have any type of chance here. Remember, the first ship built by the U.S. Navy, one of the first ones was the USS Constitution, and plays a crucial role, as you may remember from the previous previous video in this war. There's a big name that's coming up right now, Andrew Jackson. Okay, summarize what Andrew Jackson did that made him a national hero. All right, what made Andrew Jackson a national hero? Remember, he's going to be president in the future, but right here, general first. He's able to do the following, okay? He's able to defeat the Creek Nation in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in March of 1814. He's able to defeat the Creek Indians, natives. It's a massacre. right? Of 800 of the 1,000 Red Sticks are killed. But what makes him a great hero? Okay, what makes him a great hero is exactly what you see on the bottom there. The Treaty of Fort Jackson. The Treaty of Fort Jackson would force the Creeks west, the Creek Indians west, into what is now Alabama. And it's this Indian removal. He's this Tennessee officer who takes command of American troops during this point, right? The Creek War. It is what it's known as. March of 1814, Jackson wins this crucial battle. And Jackson, is destroying this nation, but he's able to gain at the time great recognition from many Americans. Maybe today you would look at it differently, but all of a sudden he's able to have this treaty, so it's forcing the Creeks west. And this is not the first time or the last time you're going to see treaties that are going to benefit the Americans and not necessarily, all Americans, where you would include the Native Americans as well. Andrew Jackson is crucial to the history of this war. Okay? He's preparing to fight British at New Orleans. He was prepared to fight the British in New Orleans. He seems to be an individual that is prepared for what is ahead. Of course, nobody knew everything that was ahead, but he's seen as an incredibly strong individual who presented himself in a way that it made him look like he knew what he was doing. Okay, and that brought great confidence to the troops under his charge. Contrast the U.S. military might before and after the War of 1812. Well, before the War of 1812, you know that the United States looked as if, in a way, similar, not exactly how, but similar to the way they looked at the beginning of the American Revolution. What the Americans did right now is they withstood its first real military test. You see that first bullet? We're going to get to these slides later, but you may want to jot this down. The Americans, prior to the War of 1812, never had its first real military test. In the American Revolution, right, they were colonists. So this is the first test of their military. And right at the start, Jefferson, right, previous president, wanted to reduce the spending. He wasn't, you had John Adams, who was so determined, second president, so determined to build up the Department of the U.S. Navy, right, that hopefully you remember. But at the time, Madison comes in here, and you all of a sudden have a Navy that is nowhere strong as where it was before. You have an Army, military that hasn't ever withstood its first real test. So at the end of the war, right at the beginning, similar to the Revolution, it looked as if the Americans would have lost. But what happens here is it affirms American independence and it solidifies its national identity. It's showing that the United States can, hold their ground, can stand for the independence that they had won. And that's crucial to know, that this war is a test, in a way. It's a test to necessarily see, can the United States, can the Americans defend themselves? And most importantly, can they defend their independence? And that's what's essential. At the beginning of the war, okay, the United States has 12,000 troops, Britain 10,000, that's British and Canadian troops. But the big part here is not that, okay, 12,000 U.S., 10,000 Britain. It's only 6 warships and then 584 for Britain. And then the sailors, the U.S. at the beginning of the war had 5,000. Okay, Britain had 140,000. The U.S. had 1,800 Marines. Britain had 31,000 Marines. If you take a look at the numbers, you're going to see here why many individuals in our area here in New England would not be confident that the U.S. should go into war. But just like they did in the Revolution, the U.S. is able to prove themselves, prove their might, and push forward. Red question, number 6. Why did Tecumseh advise many Native Americans to stop trading with white settlers? Why did Tecumseh want many Americans, Native Americans, to stop trading with white settlers? Let me pull up a slide here that can remind us. Okay. Britain teams with Tecumseh and the natives because they know the land better than anybody ever could. And they also have a great might to win. Tecumseh is not going to want the natives to continue to trade with the settlers. And what's important that you need to know, okay, there's an important part you need to know during this time. Native Americans relied on many, many goods. They were labeled as white trade goods. Okay, this includes, you may want to jot this down, muskets, guns, right? Cloth, cooking pots, whiskey. They believed that if they returned to their old ways, the natives didn't always rely on those items, they could gain power to resist the white invaders. So they're going to gain the power to resist the white invaders. So they're going to go back to their old ways. So they're not as dependent on these white, the settlers. So they're not as dependent as on them anymore. They want to make sure they go back to their old ways because many saw these white settlers as a great threat to their way of life. So the natives want to show, Native Americans, many of them want to show, Tecumseh, is advising that they have their way of life. And the last thing they want is interference from, the white settlers, and also to make it seem as if the white settlers have so much of a great influence. Who were the Warhawks? Warhawks, okay? Warhawks. They are individuals. They are members of Congress from the South and West that called for war. They are individuals who pushed for war, generally from the South and West. They were stirred by a strong sense of nationalism. Think of nationalism. The word nation is in the word. It's a devotion to one's country. It means devotion to one's country. You're going to want to jot that down, nationalism. Warhawks generally felt that Britain was treating the United States as if the United States was still a British colony. So the Warhawks wanted to show that, hey, Britain, you don't have that authority anymore. We're no longer, under your control. We're no longer a British colony. So we're going to defend our American rights. We're going to fight for our American rights. So these Warhawks wanted to defend and fight for the rights they believed they deserved and won during the Revolution when the United States became independent. Henry Clay, you may want to jot down Henry Clay. He's one of the most outspoken Warhawks. He's from Kentucky. And he wanted to punish Britain for seizing American ships. So he said, we must punish Britain for seizing American ships. He hopes to conquer Canada as well. And this is going to be, an individual that's going to continue to come up again and again as well. He wanted to conquer Canada because, from the British. And Warhawks felt winning the war against Britain would bring lasting safety. You may want to jot this down. In addition to Henry Clay's name, the Warhawks felt that winning a war against Britain would bring lasting safety to the settlers on the frontier. Next question. What problems did the United States military have? What problems did the United States military have? Well, what you need to realize here pretty quickly is the United States military is not prepared. Okay, they're not prepared. Right away, you have clear American defeats, similar to the Revolution. Okay, you have quick American defeats. because the U.S. is not prepared. We've said it already. You have these war hawks who are pushed for war, but they want to show Britain that we can withstand our independence here. But the numbers I gave you before, hope you jotted those down, right? There's few regular troops, so the government, again, is relying on volunteers like it did in the Revolution. What you have here, though, is a navy that was depleted. It's depleted. It wasn't what it was used to be. Britain and the natives are going to team together, and they're going to look extremely, extremely strong. You have 3 American forts that are, defeated right away. The initial invasion of Canada and the Northwest Territory is a disaster. The Americans quickly realize that they're not prepared for this war, and they need to go ahead, and if they're going to withstand Britain, they need to figure out a plan. And again, if you take a look at the numbers, it's pretty shocking. And in a way, we need these privateers here to help us, because if you did not have these privateers, these privately owned ships, what could have happened? What would have happened, right? Would the Americans have been able to prove that they are truly able to withstand against Britain? I'm not sure, and I don't know if you're sure either. Next one. What became of the Warhawks' plan to conquer Canada? What became of the Warhawks' plan to conquer Canada? Right, Canada under Britain at the time, British control. So, what I need you to make sure you have is this. You do need to, you can take a look at the slide for a moment. General William Hull is going to move American troops into Canada from Detroit. And the Canadians had just a few untrained troops to fight. They were led, though, by a British general by the name of Isaac Brock, experienced British general, and he paraded his soldiers, the redcoats, right? And he wanted to make, the last thing he wants to do is show any fear. So he wants to make it look like you have an experienced number of troops helping the Canadians. So these are the redcoats, the British troops. He also wanted to make Americans think that a large number of Native Americans were potentially there as well. So if you see the redcoats, you're assuming the natives are there. So Brock is trying to scare off the Americans in a way, because he feels if he doesn't scare them off, the Americans are going to push their way into Canada. And Hull retreated from Canada, and other invasions to Canada would fail. But on you're going to have this down, guys. April 27th, 1813, the U.S. soldiers would cross Lake Ontario and successfully capture York. They're going to successfully capture York. York is the present-day Toronto. British would surrender the city on April the 28th of 1813, and Americans would burn many government buildings, including Parliament. So finally, it seems that the Americans, it doesn't seem, it is, right? The Americans were able to conquer Canada. That continued perseverance, 320 American casualties, okay, but it's out of 2,000 that have set off for York, so the Americans are able to pull that off. What achievement made Andrew Jackson well known through the country? What made Andrew Jackson well known through the country? So we've said it again, we said it before, I'll say it again. The strength that Andrew Jackson presents during this war, the way he presents himself, well prepared, always showing strength, and the way he's able to go through the natives, make many Americans feel, that this individual knows exactly what he's doing. His force is going to include thousands and thousands of frontiermen, and Choctaws. And the Choctaws were longtime rivals of the Indian natives, okay? So they're going to be also familiar with the land as well. That's pretty smart on Andrew Jackson's part there. Okay, so what he's known for is basically this treaty, the Treaty of Fort Jackson. Andrew Jackson becomes a national hero. His fame did not dim even when Americans learned that the battle had taken place 2 weeks after the war ended. That's the Battle of New Orleans. And the United States and Britain already signed a treaty in Europe. You're going to want to jot this down because this is where his fame really, really goes up here. Is January 8th of 1815, British attack American soldiers. Again and again, British soldiers marched toward the American trenches. If you want to look, guys, 279 in the textbook. 2,000 British fell under the deadly fire of American sharpshooters, and American cannons also played a great role. And 7 Americans died, 2,000 British died. The Battle of New Orleans, and overnight, Andrew Jackson becomes a great hero. Okay, the previous treaty I told you to jot down is a big one. This is even bigger. Andrew Jackson is able to prove that his attack on New Orleans is quite impressive. He's quite this national hero. You have many British dying, but very few Americans. Take a look there, guys. The British suffered 2,037 casualties, okay, and the Americans suffered 71 at the end of the day. He's known as this great hero at the time because he's able, right? He's able to successfully push the Americans towards the end of this war, not in the sense of losing, but in the sense of great victory. So the Battle of New Orleans is essential to associate with Andrew Jackson because it's a well thought out plan. And many Americans are, who are home now are looking at Andrew Jackson and saying, wow, he is able to do a lot here. He's able to push forward. What would we do without Andrew Jackson? Question is, will they always think of him that way in the years to come? Let's move back to Connecticut. In 4th grade, you may remember going with Miss LaCursey to our state capital, Hartford. What was the purpose of the Hartford Convention? What was the purpose of the Hartford Convention? Okay, so the impact of the War of 1812. If you want to see more, guys, you can go to 280. So, delegates from around New England, the area we live in, right? Hartford, Connecticut. We're going to go to Hartford, Connecticut. This is where they're going to meet. December of 1814. Many of them were Federalists, okay? And they did not support the Democratic Republican president and the war. Some delegates who went to this Hartford Convention threatened to nullify or cancel the state of war in their states if the war continued. So they wanted their states to pull out if the war continued. And others threatened to leave the Union, right? Threatened to leave the Union, pull from the Union, United States. You can't have that happen right now, okay? The delegates debated what to do. News of this peace treaty, right, that Jackson is quickly associated with, comes and arrives. It arrives. The Hartford Convention ends quickly because the war is over. But at the same time, you're going to have many individuals say, that war was meaningless. That war was meaningless. And many believe that in the end, the threat of secession further weakened the Federalist Party that they already saw as dying. So that's important to come to mind. The Hartford Convention, if you want to jot this down, okay, the term that you would have associated with Hartford Convention, it's a gathering of New Englanders to protest the War of 1812. You want to make sure to have that, okay? A gathering of New Englanders to protest the War of 1812. And some even threatened to leave the Union if this war continued. So that's big because you have individuals who are going to pull from the Union, from the United States, if this war continues. So what I like to do is continue this lesson. That's part 1. Let me know if you have any questions. Number wrong on the top. Let's continue, though, where we were last time. We're going to go ahead and finish the notes for this time. So I'd like you to go ahead and either continue on the notes. If you had a document, Google Docs that you typed it in, okay, you can do that there too. If you did on a separate sheet, you can go ahead and do that too. If you rather print a new one or you have an extra, go ahead and do that too. Keep it neat, guys, and let's continue. We're going to continue right now with Andrew Jackson. So this is the Southern Front, right? Remember, many Southerners pushed for this war. So why was New Orleans important on the left? Why was New Orleans important on the left? Okay. After Baltimore, British regrouped and decided to launch an attack on New Orleans. They're going to launch an attack on New Orleans to take control of the Mississippi River. So they're going to want to take control of the Mississippi River. So you have Andrew Jackson here. Okay, you might remember that he was just able to have this Treaty of Fort Jackson, right? Moving many natives from the south. But you have Andrew Jackson here. He's going to lead a mixed match group of 4,500 soldiers to lead the city. What do we mean by mixed match? It's going to include regulars, militiamen, Indians, African Americans who were free, and also pirates. So you're going to include all these individuals here. So all these individuals who have different beliefs, different backgrounds, different areas that they live in, different ways in which they were growing up, but they're all going to work together, okay, to defend the city. British lands off the coast of Louisiana on December 14th of 1814. So British is going to land off the coast. Remember the importance of the seas during this war. Several smaller skirmishes, you know, little battles, not necessarily battle, little fights here, leads up to the main attack by the British. So they're going to have a few attacks here and there, but nothing big until January 8th of 1815. That's when it's going to get really big, okay? You may remember little skirmishes, little attacks can lead to a lot. And that happened at the beginning of the war with the Native Americans and the Americans. So you're going to Tecumseh, you may recall that in one of the earlier questions in the textbook as well. So take a moment and do jot this down while I finish discussing. But basically, Andrew Jackson leads a pretty large group, 4,500 soldiers. They're mixed matched, but the British are going to land off the coast. They're going to have a few little battles, and it's going to lead to the main event, the main attack. Okay, here's a little visual on the right-hand side. So you can pause this at any time. You could take a look as well. Okay, Jackson's men build an impressive earthworks next to the Mississippi called Jackson's Line. It's located, you can see right here, guys. It's located behind the canal, okay? So Jackson's men build this earthworks, this area that they're getting ready here. They're getting ready. They're filling the area. They're going to get ready to defend it, okay? January 8th, 1815. The British launch a four-pronged attack on the American lines. So it's a four-pronged attack, okay? 8,000 redcoats in total. You can see the arrows that show you, right, the four-pronged attack. So three groups. You have three groups, and this is interesting because the three groups, they're going, you see it on the map there, they're going to engage different parts of this line. They're not going to all go for the same line. They're not going to go for the whole same line of Americans. They're going to attack different lines. Okay, so now the Americans are going to have to really be prepared, be ready to take on these redcoats that are coming from three different angles. A fourth group sails. Here's where it gets really interesting. Here's the Mississippi River. Okay, you see Jackson's headquarters there, but Mississippi River. All of a sudden, you have a fourth group, three on land and one by sea. They're going to sail up the Mississippi River to outflank Jackson from the south. So you have the British attacking at four different angles. That's what it means by four-pronged, okay? Four different areas. Think about, you know, let's say if you all of a sudden, you're being attacked from four different areas, what direction do you move it, right? And that's what the Americans had to see. So Jackson, here's where he's going to get his, many individuals are going to see him as very intelligent, going to become this great hero, right? How is he going to withstand the British, withstand the Redcoats at this Jackson line? It's called Jackson's Line, which was located right here behind the canal. So Britain looks to outsmart Jackson, but let's see what happens. Okay, this is big here. You should, have, what is the Battle of New Orleans on the left-hand side? Remember, it's going to lead to this big event. So the attack is on here. As the attack began, the field was covered with a heavy fog. You never drive, with your parents, guardian, grandparents in a heavy fog. It's difficult to see the car in front of you. It's difficult to see even further. You try to look a few cars in front of you or what's ahead. You can't see anything. All you see is fog. It's extremely difficult to drive, right? Now imagine going into battle with all that dense fog. You're not going to know who's in front of you, what's in front of you. You better know the territory, because if you don't know what's coming on the territory. So the British approach, and the fog begins to lift, okay? And all of a sudden, as they approach closer, this fog is going away, and they're met with a very, very strong artillery fire from the Americans. Americans are ready, okay? British made a mistake, okay? The earthworks, okay? It's a high area. The British needed ladders to scale it so they could attack back. And if they had these ladders, they'd be able to fire back. The Americans have it because they're on the other side. The British forget it. What happens here? The British make a crucial mistake. All three of the main attacks are repulsed. Okay, they don't work. They're not effective. British suffers over 2,037 casualties, and the Americans suffer 71. Okay, you have a difference of nearly 2,000 there. Nearly 2,000 difference. It wasn't even close. What does Jackson prove? Jackson proves that the Americans were well prepared for this. The Americans, in this sense, outsmarted the British, and the British didn't go ahead and outsmart the Americans. Again, it's pretty crucial to understand that. And understand, layout of the land is essential. You know the area. If you know the area and you need to do something quickly, you need to take action quickly, you generally are going to be more prepared. If you don't know the area, you're going to struggle, especially if you have to make a decision pretty quickly. And the Battle of New Orleans, okay, I'm going to show you a clip next time. But Battle of New Orleans, primary source here to show you, you could see the Redcoats there. You can see that earthworks is high, right? You have, I told you, high structure that is built. The image here, the illustration doesn't show it as high, but still, it shows the Redcoats struggling to get to the other side. Okay, and you have on the bottom here, if we were in class, I'd ask you, what do you see? You have the pirates, the natives, the African Americans, these individuals, this mix of individuals, 4,000 ready to fight for American victory. And on the other side, you have the British. You have some coming from the back, but the ones up close, right? The ones up close, there's one here who looks pretty strong, but the ones up close are getting sent down pretty quickly. You have an individual here whom, of course, you would know as Andrew Jackson. How does he see? He doesn't seem nervous. He's seeming ready to go. What is the Treaty of Ghent on the left-hand side? What is the Treaty of Ghent on the left-hand side, please? So how is this war officially going to end? Jackson is seen as this great war hero, a great American hero, even though many were not keen on having this war to begin with. This treaty is signed Christmas Eve of 1814, December 24th, 1814, okay, in Ghent, Belgium, The American Commission, the Americans, were headed by John Quincy Adams. Hey, is that our friend we remember from the previous unit? No, it's not, but it's his son. John Quincy Adams is the son of our first vice president, right, second president, John Adams. This is before the Battle of New Orleans, okay? think of communication, right? Think of how fast we communicate with each other now at all times, during times of war, during times of peace. It took a while for word to reach. You remember Mason telling us in the class, it sometimes would take upwards of 2 months, okay, to receive word. So word of the treaty didn't reach the generals. So Mr. A, how did they make a treaty at the end of 1814, but you just told me a battle about 1815? Well, guys, it's because the word didn't reach the generals in war yet. It restores everything to how it was before the war. It's called to a pre-war status quo, right here, pre-war status quo. And it's a mutual end to hostilities, so to stop the fighting. Returning of prisoners, returning of territory. Let's just go back to how it was before the war, basically. Let's go back to how it was before the war. Issues that started the war had resolved themselves by the end of the war, okay? So these issues are not going to continue. They're going to end right now. The British Impressment Act, you may remember from the previous, okay, it was repealed 2 days before the war began. That means it's no longer there. The Impressment Act is gone, so that's not a problem. Defeat of the French in 1814 means the impressment was no longer needed because the French were defeated, so that wasn't needed. The embargo, you might know the Embargo Acts, or it's also known, I have it here 2 ways, embargo/non-intercourse acts, they're gone, repealed. Indian resistance quelled. It's not, Indian resistance is stopped, so to say. Is it? Some of you who know a little bit more about history, no, not quite. But Tecumseh is killed. So great Native American leaders are killed, not just Tecumseh. So Americans would feel that the natives are no longer a threat, so to say. And Jackson had the great victories over the Creeks in the South. So Americans don't see natives as an issue anymore. They don't see the Impressment Acts as an issue anymore. They don't see the Embargo Acts as an issue anymore. Everything is going to return to the way it was before the war. So some of you might be asking, what's the purpose of the war then? Well, to this day, individuals will argue and say, was this war necessary? Did we need to have this war? Well, let's take a look. What were the consequences of the War of 1812 on the left? And this is gonna end our unit. What were the consequences of the War of 1812 on the left? I pulled up this slide before, guys. But the Americans are going to withstand its first military test. It's a test of military might for the Americans. It's going to solidify, make their national identity stronger and more solid. It's going to affirm, say, yeah, the Americans are independent. They're going to be able to withhold their ground. They're going to be able to withstand and hold their rights. And it's going to show that the Americans are truly independent. They're able to handle this on their own. It's also going to weaken, though, Indian resistance to Western expansion. So it's westward expansion, pushing west, which, of course, began. Some of you might be thinking about Thomas Jefferson right now, and Lewis and Clark, Mr. A, thought they were treating the natives nicely. Yeah, that was the previous administration. Jefferson knew the natives. He knew that the natives were well aware of the layout of the land and the benefit of the land. So why would you eliminate individuals who are a great resource? Right? Some of you may see it as using the natives. Well, in a way, yes, but treating the natives would care. Well, all of a sudden, the natives are not going to look as strong because they're losing Britain as an ally. Okay, Britain's no longer on their side here. And Tecumseh and many great leaders for the natives are gone. So how are the natives going to stop these Americans from pushing west? It's called westward expansion. It's going to improve a struggling economy as well. These are huge. You may want to highlight some big parts here. So it's going to increase manufacturing at home. So if you're increasing manufacturing at home, that means more money into the United States. The economy is going to become stronger again. And it exposes the weakness, though, of national defense. It shows what's weak. What's weak here, guys, is at the beginning of the war, the United States looked pretty much the way they did at the beginning of the American Revolution. They're not ready, okay? You have Thomas Jefferson who wanted to reduce the spending, but Madison is going to say, hey, We need to have more troops, 3 times the size, okay, under Jefferson. 10,000 troops are going to be the standing army. And we need more money into the military. We need to have a stronger Navy. We need more money into the Navy, right? Maybe in a way, Adams was correct. And that's what it's going to teach the U.S. The Americans withstood its first military test, the weakening of Indian resistance, improvement of a struggling economy, and it exposes just how weak the U.S. was in defending itself at the beginning. Those are key. These consequences are not all positive. They're not all negative. It's a mix of both. And it's a mix of where we move forward. Your note set is concluded. You can staple the notes. Tomorrow, we're going to have an assessment based on these videos to make sure, see who's truthfully watching. So what I'd like you to do is please work carefully. There's 2 posts. One are the questions that I hope you corrected in detail, and the notes that I hope you completed in detail. Let me know if you have any questions. Good job, 7. Pushing forward towards the end of the week. Let's end the week with the assessment tomorrow. So what should we do? Let's start to review. Take care. Goodbye.